following presentation is an Delmarva Studios production.
Welcome back, Truth Seekers, from around the world. It's time for another edition of the Flat Earth Files. Hope everyone had a nice weekend, and I hope you have a great week. Should be interesting, to say the least. A lot more divide and conquer coming our way, specifically Tuesday. We'll see how everything plays out. It's episode 32. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Space Shuttle Challenger, some of the theories out there, and we're going to talk a little bit more about satellites. But before that, we're going to touch on some emails. But first, as always, please do email us. It's the flatearthfiles@gmail.com. Again, it is the flatearthfiles@gmail.com. Just a heads up, I'm a little behind on your emails. The last week of March and the first week of April are very busy here on the homestead. Lots of hard work, lots of planting, lots of cultivating. So we've been very busy. So just bear with. And of course, you can check out our new website. There's a forum, chat room, lots of interactive things there for you to chat with like-minded individuals. And that is the flatearthfiles.com. Again, it is the flatearthfiles.com. And after today, our next podcast, I believe, was Wednesday, April the 5th. Another interview coming your way. Let's go ahead and kick it off with your emails. And our first email says, "My wife listens to your podcast, and I have just started to work through your Flat Earth Files. You have really articulated your information well. I wish you were around years ago when we researched it and came to the same conclusion." She said that you had mentioned the mud flood with your last podcast, and she asked me to send this source of information to you. And of course, he is referring to the interview we had with Rashad, and that was one of the things that he found in his journey to the truth. And this website that the emailer has provided for me is the unexpectedcosmology.com, and I will have this link in the show description for you to peruse at your leisure. Goes on to say the guy who writes these papers is a humble guy, and he does correct his mistakes and conclusions as they come up. It's really a pot of evolving studies, which, I concur with 100%. I think all of us in the truth community has changed our opinion from time to time on certain truth aspects, right? And as we get older, we change our ideals a little bit. So that's good. That's humble. I would start with his 7,000 timeline and mud flood sections. If you want to hear and see who this guy is and what he stands for, you can join his Discord channel and see the different points of view from a group of highly talented researchers and thinkers. And again, that is the unexpectedcosmology.com/articles. Hope this source helps your research and discovery of the truth and future podcasts. And again, we will share it with the masses. It will be in the show description. Knowledge is power. Our next email comes to us from one of our regular emailers. Dr. Killjoy says, "Have you ever seen the Bono Monte map of 1587? This map shows that Australia was not discovered yet, but even more interestingly, there is no ice where Antarctica is, and it depicts warm climate animals. Any thoughts?" And just like the first email, I'll include a link for you guys to check out Urbano Monte's map from 1587, which is interesting because it was only about less than 100 years from the time that Christopher Columbus had found America. And this color atlas of the world at 60 pages, we're talking almost 450 years ago. It's really interesting. And when you look at it, it's basically looking at the UN map. You're basically looking from the center of the North Pole down. So a lot of people in the flat Earth community has latched onto this map as, another piece of evidence that we are indeed on a flat plane. If you haven't seen it, it's very interesting. Again, it's got 6 of the 7 continents, no Australia. But the more interesting fact, it is depicted there is land masses in a circular motion, just like the ice wall. But there are also a couple channels between the pieces of land that some people might lend credence to the fact that, hey, maybe there is an escape route out of here, and there may be, just maybe, more land on the other side of the ice wall. So it's very interesting. Again, this will be in the show description if you've never seen it. This is the map of Urbano Monte from 1587. And if I'm not mistaken, they just found this map back in 2017, or at least that's when it really came to fruition, when that historian, what was his name? Dave Ramsey, I believe, is the guy who created the restoration and digitized it. And it became very popular only about 6 years ago. So there you go. Again, that is the really interesting world map that was done by Urbano Monte. Our next emailer says, I'll try to keep this brief. I've done very little other research over the last couple years other than to explore and read about our plain Earth. I've learned more science than I think I knew before. What an incredible journey. I've listened to all of the Flat Earth podcasts. What a great job they did. And was on the hunt for another when I came across yours. Good job. Thank you. We are very much akin, I think, as we also homestead and have researched a lot of rabbit holes over the last several years. Says, I listened to the Basil and Gons Canary Cry podcast. They had Mark Sargent on back in 2015. And I went out I went out the door the next morning, stared up at the sky, and I screamed silently in my head that I don't live in a terrarium. He says, I was sure it was a CIA psyop because I was learning about Hollow Earth at the time and thought it was a distraction from that. I watched one of my favorites, Rob Skiba, go to the Flat Earth edge and let him go thinking, wow, Rob, you really missed the boat on this one. What are you doing? I think the linchpin for me was going out on a lake with a friend and doing a 10-mile laser test. Since I'm a math teacher, I figured this can't be that hard. So one day I did. I completed the math and proved the curvature data, and I knew the game was up. Down I went. Everything makes so much more sense now. Even be still and know that I am God makes so much more sense. And I don't have to do mental gymnastics to convince myself of truths that aren't true. And this is a big one for me, his next sentence. Everything is as it is, as it seems, right? And sometimes we tend to outthink ourselves. We'll believe what someone says moreover than what we see with our own eyes. And I think sometimes, that's next level indoctrination, right? We can see with our eyes, but just because somebody tells us something differently, we're more apt to take the word of another person than what we see with our own very eyes. And again, like the emailer says, everything is as it seems, right? And the Bible says what it says, and I don't need to twist it. The moon is right there. I stare at the sun now for prolonged moments, and that's something I've done in recent years as well. I've become a bit of a sun gazer myself. Stars sing, indeed. Wind swirls, hurricanes are flat. All the space news is bunk, on and on and on. And I'll tell you, when I was doing my Challenger research, it was interesting because the NASA program was in a bit of a financial tussle. And in 85, it was interesting. There was some pullbacks on their contracts. So again, it was interesting when the Challenger happened because they had to build a new space shuttle, which, by the way, it's part of the military-industrial complex. Okay, NASA is part of that because the folks that make the warplanes, your F-16s, your Chinooks, your UH-60s, your F-15 Tomcats, are the same people who are involved in NASA, right? So the military-industrial complex, after the Challenger exploded, got another contract for $2.1 billion to create the next rocket. So like Cyndi Lauper says, money changes everything. And remember what they did to Gus Grissom and his crew. So whether or not it was just a giant hoax and those folks are still alive today, or they've looked at them as expendable and had a reason to fold, right? That they wanted to draw interest back into NASA, just like the Apollo 13, the mission, like the movie with Tom Hanks, the gravitational pull of the moon swung them around and slingshotted them back and all this nonsense. It was to draw interest. And I think the Challenger, it was the same way. People lose interest in NASA. So every, couple of decades, they need to draw something of interest, whether, recently it was landing the DART on that asteroid. It's always something. There's an asteroid that's headed towards Earth, and it's the closest, it's ever been. There's always this constant fear porn. It's creating a sense of urgency, right, to justify NASA, to justify that $70 million every single day. Let's continue with the email. It says, you keep mentioning a curriculum that really tweaks my interest as I work with homeschool families as a support teacher and have for 15 years. Well, thank you very much for doing that. I really have a special place in my heart for homeschool since we decided to do it. Goes on to say, I hesitate to go full bore and say, let's go, because the rest of life, but it's a conversation I'd like to start anyways. In the spirit of Charlotte Mason, I think a great approach is simply to use living books. You can use a Clay to Wassil Odell, Zetetic Astronomy, 100 Proofs, maybe even Hendry's Greatest Lie, which is that's the one I've been reading right now, and I may read a couple chapters here in the coming weeks. But he does say a good chunk of his book isn't science. It is, but it's a very interesting read, and it's very well thought out. He says, I think my best teaching is found on this website, and it's pinnaclebaptist.com/biblical-cosmology. And again, don't worry about writing it down because I will have it in the show description for you all to check out as well. It has a really interesting PowerPoint presentation within that link. So again, for you to peruse at your leisure. After that, I think simply organizing into units and developing science activities that can be done at home would wrap it up nicely. And that's what we do. A lot of simple science projects, even building radios, very simple things like that. You can go down to your hardware store and spend $10 for stuff and make your own little at-home radio. So many experiments. And of course, this time of year, my daughter's out with her mom planting seeds and doing the whole process there. So lots of great things to learn. Life skills, true life skills, right? I've already been starting to think and plan on how I could present to people who are interested. Our school has many courses that families can sign up for. And I'd love to offer Helio or Geo. You decide based on the evidence. And that's kind of what I do on my other podcast. I try to just present, and even on this one, I present information. I'm not telling you to think a certain way. I kind of say, hey, this is what I've read. This is what resonates with me, and I present it to you, and it's up to you to buy into it or not, right? And again, he says, thank you very much. Looking forward to catching up on all your podcasts. And To the listener, I'll try to remember to email back as well at the end of this program. Send us your information, and if there's some folks out there who are looking for a homeschool coach, we can get them in touch with you if you're interested. We need this community to bond together, and let's all work with like-minded people, right? Okay. One more email. That was an outstanding email. This listener says, I'm a new listener to the Flat Earth Files podcast. I stumbled across it somehow, and I'm amazed that this podcast is being recommended. I've gotten a lot of these type of emails. I'm starting at the beginning and finding it very, very interesting. I only recently realized that people actually believe the Earth is flat. I thought calling someone a flat earther was just a slur to the conspiracy theorist, right? Very interesting indeed. My questions keep going to these, though. I don't really understand how there could be no such thing as outer space. How do you explain what happened to the Challenger in 1986? Well, you're about to find out with this podcast today. Did they not go out in space? Absolutely not. Did it not blow up and kill everyone? Remains to be seen. We're going to present the evidence to everyone, and it's up to you to decide. You may want to research further. Now, before the great YouTube purge of 2018, there was a plethora of information at your fingertips. Now, you can still find it on YouTube, but you're probably going to you'll have an easier time finding the information on the Challenger rabbit hole on Rumble and BitChute. And if I can find something that's decent, and I'll try to post it to my channel, because there is some, we'll call it fairly strong evidence that that these people kind of, like the Capricorn 1, they didn't really board this mission, because I think 6 out of the 7 astronauts had twins. Can I ask you, what are the odds of 6 or 7 people having twins that are going on a certain mission? How many people out there have twins and have, by a matter of circumstance, been around that many other people with twins in their entire life? So, and when you look at the eyes and the certain features, spaces in the teeth, it's very, very interesting. It's quite a rabbit hole. If you've never heard it, like everything else, like the flat Earth, before you quickly eschew it, I highly encourage you to take the time to research it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Also wondering about Bezos' Blue Origin, that is shuttling people up into space. And it's not really space, it's just low orbit. If they went much higher, they would run into the firmament like the Go Fast rocket. The people come back and report utter darkness and seeing the Earth. Where do they go if not into outer space? Well, they go above the sun and the moon because it's local, right? How do you explain this question? Well, we're going to talk about that, and thank you for your email, and I appreciate your open-mindedness, and I encourage everyone to research, because there are a lot of answers out there. Outer space is, according to scientism, is this never-ending continuum of emptiness. Because according to them, we've been hurtling through space, again, chasing the sun at 66,000 miles per hour for 4.54 billion years. Think about that. Just try to comprehend that distance that we've been chasing, yet every single night the North Star is in the same exact place. You take a picture of the stars tonight, and then you come back out a year from now, everything's going to be in the exact same place. And it's been that way, forever. Yet we are hurtling through space at these phenomenal speeds. But you can look right at the stars. They're right there. It just doesn't make any sense. And going back to the last emailer talking about, everything is as it seems, right? That's very important to me, because that was, during my awakening process of Flat Earth, which was my, we'll call it the last and final one. I was kind of, I don't know what the wording is. I don't want to say embarrassed. I guess I was disappointed in myself when I realized that we did live on a flat Earth, because, again, things are as they seem, and I believed complete strangers who tried to tell me, hey, don't believe what you see, believe what we say. So, the flat Earth has helped me become a much more discerning person. And I'm like, I'm what's the Missouri license plate say? Show me, the show me state. That's how I'm now. Show me. Don't tell me. Show me. Right? Just because somebody puts on a lab coat and gets in front of the TV and says something doesn't make it a fact. Now, does it? No. Show me, and just don't show me math either, because that's what they do. They do backwards planning in math to get to the answers that they want. Okay? Things are as they seem. Okay? All right. So that's our emails for today. I don't have a lot of time, like I said at the beginning. I think I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. We started recording this last night, about 7 p.m. Eastern time. And about 35 minutes into the podcast, we had a storm come out of nowhere, knock out the power, and I lost the audio. So this is actually the second time that we are recording this audio. And one final reminder before we get into today's podcast, talking about satellites and the space shuttle. Just a reminder, please, when you're done listening to the podcast, take time to go to the show description and check out all the supporting documentation. And share it with others. Okay. You never know when, a person may be willing to listen. So there you go. Without any further ado, let's get to episode 32. We're going to talk about the Challenger and satellites. So the first article we're going to discuss is, it talks about satellites, and it's also going to touch on some very circumstantial evidence talking about, and when I say circumstantial, I've seen enough evidence to know that the moon landing is a hoax. But again, I'm just going to present it to you. But we're going to basically we're going to provide evidence how the space agency has defrauded the American people. And at some point, we need to stand up to these scams. This is from Vedic Cosmos Acetus, talking about satellites. And again, in considering spaceflight, we should understand the limitations of rockets, because without atmosphere to propel, there is no thrust to a rocket, so it simply loses its propulsion and begins to descend. Okay? Hence, despite the grandiose displays of rocket launches, all rockets simply begin to level off and descend. The old what goes up must come down. And usually rockets end up in the ocean, out of sight, out of mind, in the Bermuda Triangle somewhere, where they harmlessly splash down. Meanwhile, the astronauts, who never actually were in the rocket, are busy filming in secret studios or on zero-G planes to mimic the sitcoms they use to both deceive and entertain the public. So public displays of rocket launches occasionally happen, yet most are falsely announced, yet never really take place. So we're going to talk a little bit about an outline, the basic space hoax fraud paradigm. And we'll talk about how satellites are not actually in outer space, but are various high-altitude, lighter-than-air systems that mimic space satellites. And a lot of people, and it was the first thing I thought, the quote-unquote Chinese spy balloon was just a satellite that came into orbit and people caught eyes on, and they were trying to protect the globe. Right? If it got out that that's how all the satellites are being held up, it would destroy outer space. Okay? So we're going to start by talking about 4 cases of egregious fraud that completely invalidates NASA as a credible agency and instead is a purveyor of both pseudoscience and Lysenkoism. Now, Lysenkoism is used metaphorically to describe the manipulation or distortion of the scientific process as a way to reach a predetermined conclusion as dictated by ideological bias, often related to social or political objectives. Now, the American taxpayer derives virtually no benefit from NASA's existence and alleged scientific contributions that are derived by supposed explorations, Dr. Evil air quotes there, and experiments in space. Absent from any other sources to verify, okay, we have to prostrate ourselves to the so-called experts, despite irrefutable evidence that NASA is nothing more, and I mean nothing more, than an elaborate financial embezzler and pseudoscience peddler. And it's just another one of the ways that the folks at the top, their little Ponzi scheme. And that's how they fund all these the black ops that they do to control us. So, in short, before we get into these 4 evidences, once a fraud is detected, everything that sits upon it now is in question. Okay? You go to zero credibility. Right? Would everyone agree with that? And you'd have to build yourself back up. So who would disagree with the logic of a found fraud destroying the validity of everything? It's reasonable, it's predictable, and has the power to instantly change the direction of one's perception, even those that were held sacred. Fraud has no limits by those who engage in it, and it's been around for a long, long time. Do you think the real fraudsters stop at just one fraud? Of course not. Or do you think that they keep going and going until they either A, die, or B, get caught? Or C, they don't care. Just look at the way that Bush and all the presidents continue to abuse power, and not only do they get away with it, they laugh in our face, right? The answer is simple. We all know. Why would you ever stop lucrative, fraudulent activity if you know you're never going to be caught? So the chance for systematic fraud, once initial fraud is found, becomes a virtual certainty. So let's start with NASA's 4 undeniable frauds. I shouldn't have to go into it because we've spoke about it ad nauseum, but let's look at some of the reasons that the moon landing was was a hoax. That you had the waving flag, right? People have pointed out that when the first moon landing was shown on live television, viewers could clearly see the American flag waving and fluttering as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin planted it into the moon rock. Photos of the landing also seem to show the rippling in a breeze, such as the image, which you can find anywhere, clearly shows a fold in the flag. And the obvious problem here is that, according to scientism, that there's no air in the moon's atmosphere. Therefore, there is no wind to cause the flag to blow. So that is number 1. Number 2, the lack of an impact crater. Of course, the lunar lander. If NASA had really landed on the moon, there would be a blast crater underneath the lunar module to mark its landing because of the boosters underneath of it. And there is absolutely zero crater visible. And it looks like the lunar module was simply placed there and they filmed it and it was over. So there you go. Multiple light sources. If you listen to the episode we had with Bart Sabrell, you could tell that there was lights from different angles, like show lights, because of the shadows were going in different directions. And of course, NASA, they attempt to blame the uneven landscape on the strange shadows, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Then, the Van Allen radiation belt / the firmament, the unexplained object in I'm trying to remember whose mask it was, but after the photographs of the moon landings were released, people were quick to notice a mysterious object in the reflection of one of the astronauts' helmets from the Apollo 12 mission. The object appears to be hanging from a rope or a wire, and had no reason to be there whatsoever. Obviously, akin to something that would be on a set, filming something, maybe a camera or some type of special effects prop. But it's it's very interesting, and there's lots of theories on it as well. Interesting. We'll keep going. Slow motion, right? In order to support claims that the moon landings were shot in a studio, the low gravity, right? And people have sped up the film. Most people say it was just people posing as the astronauts walking at regular speed, but it was slowed down to appear that they were in low gravity. And the hidden cables can be seen if you go to YouTube and just put NASA fails or NASA hoax. You'll see countless videos with what the astronauts doing their little flips in space, whether it be the ISS, the International Space Station, etc. You can certainly see the cables that are attached to these people's hips. And the famous one of the two people talking in the background, there's a guy that appears to be zipping across the space station in low gravity. You can actually see the cables attached to the astronaut. And that goes back to the beginning when we were talking. These folks know we're never going to hold them accountable. So they don't, at this point, they don't even really care if they get caught or not. Because with all the distractions and everything else in our world, they know we're not going to spend much time. And it's been presented. The evidence has been presented fully to show that these people are nothing but used car salesmen. Yet we continue to fend them this $70 million every single day. Then, of course, there's the lack of stars. No stars in the photographs. The conflicting reports of the astronauts when they came back. One of them said, I saw stars. The other one said they didn't. Then, of course, there was the rock with the letter C. One of the most famous photos from the moon landings showed a rock on the foreground, and there was a letter C. They mark props. The letter C was marked on the rock. And this isn't something that would be an accident or just happen to look like a C. Very clear. It had the letter C embossed onto this quote-unquote moon rock. It was engraved into it. And it is perfectly symmetrical. So, again, this was not some type of natural occurrence. This was placed there by the film crew or the studio, marking props, and they probably were supposed to put it facing down, but somebody forgot, and they exposed the letter C to the camera. And when asked about it, NASA has given conflicting excuses. One would say, "Oh, the photographer added it as a practical joke," or a stray. One of them said it was a stray hair that got tangled up somewhere in the developing process, and it just happened to look like a perfectly embossed C on the rock. Then, of course, there are the layered crosshairs. The cameras that were used by the astronauts during the moon landings had multitudes of crosshairs. They're imprinted all over the photographs. But some of the images clearly show the crosshairs behind objects in the scene, which imply that the photographs were edited and doctored after being taken. And there are lots of them for you to peruse on the internet as well. I'll leave this, again, just go to the show description to look at these pictures. But many, the truthers, the people who've been going after NASA, like the Bart Sobrels, have suggested that NASA printed the man-made objects over a legitimate photograph of the moon to hoax the landings. And then, of course, there is the duplicate backdrops, the use of multiple sets and backdrops in the NASA hoax. If you look at the two photos from the Apollo 15 mission, they have clearly identical backdrops, despite being officially listed by NASA as having been taken miles apart. Okay, and these are the exact same backdrops. And again, according to them, this is from Apollo 15, they were taken miles apart on the moon. One photo even shows the lunar lander module. When all photographs were taken, the module had already landed. So how can it possibly be there for one photo and disappear in another? So again, NASA comes up with lame excuses. There's just no way around these things. And, these are just a very small amount of evidence to say that the entire Apollo missions were nothing but a hoax. Let's continue on. Let's talk about the 1986 Challenger disaster hoax. And, man, where do you start? And again, this is a theory that is out there, and it's been out there for many, many years. Let's go back to that day, what they presented to us on January 28th, 1986, and this was live on CNN.
SRB hydraulic power units have started. T-minus 21 seconds, and the solid rocket booster engine gimbal now underway. T-minus 15 seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Control program. Roger, roll, Challenger. Good roll program confirmed. Challenger now heading down range. Engines beginning throttling down now at 94%. Normal throttles for most of the flight, 104%. We'll throttle down to 65% shortly. Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles, downrange distance 3 nautical miles.
So the 25th Space Shuttle mission is now on the way after more delays than NASA cares to count. This morning it looked as though they were not going to be able to get off.
1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
Looks like a couple of the solid rocket boosters blew away from the side of the shuttle in an explosion.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
And it's obviously a day that those of us who were alive at the time would never forget. It occurred on January 20th, 1986, when the NASA Space Shuttle Orbiter Challenger also known as OV-099, broke apart 73 seconds into its flight, leading to the deaths of 7 of its crew members, which included 5 NASA astronauts and 2 payload specialists. The spacecraft disintegrated over the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Cape Canaveral in Florida at 11:38 Eastern Time, which is interesting because both of those numbers have a lot of esoteric meaning in numerology, 11 being the most powerful number, which, of course, the 11 is in the Kennedy killing, the 11 is in September 11th, and then 38 is the murder number in Gematria. Approximately 17% of Americans witnessed the launch live. That's huge. You look, 300 million Americans, 17% witnessed live. And I remember in school, they had most of the schools had the TVs on. It was a big deal because Krista McCullough, who was a school teacher, was part of the mission. And again, 17% of Americans witnessed live because of the presence of payload specialist Krista McCullough, who would have been the first teacher in space. Media coverage of the accident was extensive. One study reported that 85% of Americans surveyed had heard the news within an hour of the accident. It was a huge, huge story back in the day. Some experts believe most, if not all, of the crew were alive and possibly even conscious during the entire descent until impact with the ocean. Thereafter, recovery efforts were managed by a search, recovery, and reconstruction team. Its aim was to salvage debris that would help in determining the cause of the accident. Sonar, divers, remotely operated submarines, and manned submarines were all used during the search, which covered an area of 480 nautical miles and took place at depths of up to 370 meters. On March 7th, divers from the USS Preserver identified what might be the crew compartment on the ocean floor. The finding, along with the discovery of the remains of all 7 crew members, was confirmed the next day, and on March 9th, NASA announced the finding to the press. The remains of the crew that were identifiable were returned to their families on April 29th, 1986. 3 of the crew's family members, Judith Resnick, Dick Scobie, and Captain Michael J. Smith, were buried by their families at Arlington National Cemetery at individual grave sites. Mission Specialist Lieutenant Colonel Ellison Onizuka was buried at the National Memorial Cemetery in Honolulu, Hawaii. Unidentified crew remains were buried communally at the Space Shuttle Challenger Memorial in Arlington, Virginia on May 20th, 1986. When the Space Shuttle disintegrated over an 800-mile stretch of Texas and Louisiana during its re-entry to Earth, it was traveling at over 8,000 miles per hour from California to Florida in less than 15 minutes. All the bodies were reportedly recovered, all of them. They found enough of the space shuttle to rebuild most of it during their investigation. Compare this to when Flight 93 crashed, and there should have been almost 300 tons of debris along with 10 tons of human remains, but they recovered no debris or body parts whatsoever. So again, there's a lot of numerology within the mission itself. I'm not going to get into that. If you'd like to check it out, again, go to the show description and you can read that for yourself. But the remains of all 7 astronauts from the Challenger disaster were discovered in the crew decks on the ocean floor. Gregory Jarvis's remains were discovered in the lower middeck along with fellow astronaut Ronald McNair and school teacher Krista McCullough. During salvage operations to raise the crew deck from the ocean floor, Jarvis's body escaped from the wreckage, floated to the surface, and disappeared back into the sea. On April 15th, 1986, on the last scheduled attempt to recover wreckage, Jarvis's body was rediscovered and returned to shore. Now, let's go back again the findings with the Challenger crew, which perished back in 1986. So let's start with Richard Scobie. He was the commander of the Challenger space shuttle. He was born May 19th, 1939. He was 46 years old when he died in the Challenger explosion. He would have been 75 years. Well, this article was written a little while ago, but what would he be now? What would he be? 82? But strangely enough, there was a man named Richard Scobie, the CEO of a Chicago marketing advertising company called The Cows in the Trees. And he bears a striking resemblance, specifically if you factor in the 30-year time lapse, to Commander Richard Scobie. The same forehead, the same eyebrows, very wide set eyes apart from each other, and he has very wide set eyes that are slightly tilted down in their corners. And when you see the pictures, you're going to be very surprised if you've never seen this before. And the source of the picture is from his LinkedIn page. And if you go to the Cows in the Trees website, that you'll see an animation of a rocket-powered cow in the sky with this swirling smoke shaped like the number 6, much like the Space Shuttle Challenger as it was seen exploding on television. So check that out. Number 2, Michael J. Smith, the pilot of the Challenger. He was born April 30th, 1945. There's also a man named Michael J. Smith who bears a striking resemblance to astronaut Michael J. Smith. Same eyebrows, same blue-gray eyes, the same vertical indentation on the tip of the nose. The Michael J. Smith, who is alive and well today, is a professor emeritus retired of industrial and systems engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. All roads lead back to Wisconsin. So check that picture out. Next is Ronald McNair. He was born October 21st, 1950. He was the second African-American astronaut. He had a PhD in physics, and he looks exactly like his brother Carl. The same space between the two front teeth, except the current Carl is bald, and is an author, education consultant, and inspirational speaker. He is the founder and president of the Ronald E. McNair Foundation in honor of his brother. Next is Ellison Onizuka. He is the first Japanese-American astronaut, and he also, again, has a look-alike brother named Claude. And again, it's interesting that all these folks have brothers or twins. Born on June 24th, 1946 in Hawaii. And again, he looks just like his quote-unquote younger brother. I said twins earlier. I meant they had spouses that look identical. Same eyebrows, same eyes, same crow's feet wrinkles. I mean, it's it's very, very interesting. It's worth it's worth a thought. And if you look at all the things they've deceived us over the years, this shouldn't go without the realm of possibilities, especially with being NASA. That's all they do. But Claude is a liquor adjudication board member of the Department of Liquor Control in Hawaii. Next, of course, is Judith Resnick, one of the two females on the mission that day, born April 5th, 1949, had a PhD in electrical engineering, was the first Jewish American astronaut, and there is some meaning to the name Resnick. I had it written down somewhere, but that had some interest to it as well. Again, if she were alive today, she looks exactly like Judith Resnick, who was a professor at Yale Law School, which, of course, Yale is the home of Skull and Bones. Has the same dark curly hair, dark eyes, same eyebrow shape. And, of course, they are both named Judith Resnick. It's quite eerie how exactly they look. And both Judith Resnicks, the one that reportedly perished in 1986, and the one who works at Yale today, both of their upper lips form a slight peak on their left when they speak. Very, very interesting. And then, of course, there's Krista McAuliffe, who was primarily the reason for all of the attention of the Space Shuttle Challenger mission. The first, school teacher going into space. She was, very glowing personality. It was a big deal. And it was, when we look at the fear-based mind control that the controllers have done to us throughout the years with the visuals of 9/11, the visuals of Pearl Harbor, we wanted revenge for those acts right away, because just looking at those pictures, it was this fear-based mind control to get you to believe and get your emotions shaped in a certain manner. And everyone was shocked. And of course, we wanted this fixed. So people were willing to dump more money back into NASA to be sure that this would never happen again. So whether A, they allowed it to happen, and don't say, oh, they would never do that, especially if you're a truther and you know the truth about 9/11, Oklahoma City, and everything else that goes on in the world. The lie about Iraq and how they had no problem, killing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in the Middle East over the last how many years. They would not blink twice in order to continue the cycle of the military-industrial complex. And again, NASA is tied into that. Just look at Space Force, right? And the money that generates. And again, when the Challenger exploded, NASA was quickly given a check for $2.1 billion to replace the Challenger. And it was, what was it replaced with? The Endeavour, right? Within a year. They had the budget approved in 1987, and within 5 years, the Endeavour was up and flying. So again, they have to keep people emotionally invested into these things, right? And that was the whole reason between the Apollo 13 and I believe was the reason behind the Challenger incident. So, there you go. We're not going to delve much further into that because we need to keep going, but this information will be in the show description for you to look at and for you to decide. Then, of course, there's the International Space Station hoax, which I've said before, there's just dozens of hours of video showing all the hoaxes within that. And then, of course, there is the ongoing involvement and manipulation by Freemasons. So, again, let's put it in perspective. Number one, the Apollo moon landings fraud. The overwhelming evidence that has accumulated makes it clear that they were staged. There's no credible proof. Whether it's the Van Allen radiation belts, which is what they say, their scientism, or what we believe, the firmament, there's just no way they can go into space. And again, combined with the ultra-pathetic, unexplained loss of Apollo 11's flight information, as Don Pettit has said time and time again, we'd go back to space, but we lost the technology. We've lost all that. We've lost the reels of videos. We've lost the flight telemetry. It's absurd. Such valuable property will have been under strict lock and key. There's zero chance of us losing that if we legitimately went to the moon. And then again, there's the unrelenting videos and photos of the Masonic gestures and symbology that prove the continuity of occult underpinnings. It's all divide and conquer. It's Ponzi schemes. It's a lie. And again, number two, the Challenger disaster fraud. And it's when you think about it, if they actually did that, thinking back how the whole nation mourned, and these elaborate services and memorials were all over TV. And if they really 6 of the 7 have been identified or still alive, or, the Resnicks, the last names. This is, I think it's really worth something to think about and for you to take a look at. Then, of course, there's the ISS. Just like everything else brought to us by NASA, the International Space Station is a Freemasonic hoax. It's a complete fabrication done with special effects, models, pools, zero-G planes, and various camera tricks. There is a plethora of YouTube footage revealing underwater bubbles, scuba divers, green screens, and then again, the Masonic hand gestures are just a little too much to ignore. The other smoking gun is the actual design of the ISS, which I think it more resembles a habit trail, if y'all remember that, for the hamsters than they do an actual space laboratory. The mere fact that there are no airlocks between modules seems pretty ridiculous. Coincidentally, the modules are elongated so they can be easily simulated in a Boeing 737 zero-G plane. Then, of course, there are the Freemasons in space. Just the confirmed Freemasons are John Glenn, Gordo Cooper, Edgar Mitchell, of course, Buzz Aldrin, Don Eisel, Gus Grissom, who they murdered, James Irwin, Walter Schirra, Thomas Stafford, Paul Weitz. That's just some of the astronauts that have been positively identified as Freemasons. And this obviously does not include the Freemasons that are working for or running or behind the scenes of NASA, which is very, very significant. And one has to understand the implications of all this, okay? If you believe, what we're talking about, if you take the time to look at the Challenger hoax and you buy into it, that's just another implication of the systematic fraud that we have already positively revealed. You have to understand that NASA's credibility is totally shot. And any statements, announcements, projects, missions, technologies, they all have to be looked at with new lenses. And here's what you have to do, folks, when you're looking into these type of things, whether it be 9/11 or the Challenger, what you have to do before you sit down to look into these rabbit holes, you have to take your emotions and you have to replace it with discernment and skepticism. And it helps bring things into focus, okay? Because the mass psychopathy, and I told you this fear-based mind control that they do with these type of events, is many of the reasons why the world is on the brink of their implementation of their dystopian New World Order, right? Out of chaos comes order. That is their diluted mantra. Despite being the actual creators of the chaos they will emerge from. And just like the logo, it's a snake eating its tail. So if you want to put your faith in NASA, then you have to put your faith in other things like JFK was shot by a lone gunman, right? It was Lee Harvey. It was Lee Harvey Oswald, not the CIA, right? You have to believe the Federal Reserve Act did not give the Rothschilds control of our currency and banking system, right? You would have to say that the USS Liberty was not attacked by Israel in 1967, or the 19 jihadist Muslims actually piloted the most sophisticated commercial jets into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon on 9/11, okay? NASA is a military agency that is under the control of the creators of worldwide chaos, okay? The whole NASA construct is falling apart as people are waking up to the fraud and deception that has been foisted upon humanity, okay? And briefly on satellites, because I need to wrap this up, the origins of satellites came to mind of famous science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke. He wrote the 1945 proposal by Arthur C. Clarke for geostationary satellite communications. Now, Arthur Clarke was a high-level Freemason, and he was writing science fiction stories along with other notable sci-fi writers, including L. Ron Hubbard. And you see, Arthur Clarke did initially claim to know Hubbard. However, he would later deny that, I didn't really know him, and Hubbard was completely crazy. Then There's a 7-year overlap between 1945 and 1952 when Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, and Arthur C. Clarke were all alive and well and were witness to the science fiction industry that were exploding into the eager minds of young people. And a lot of people find the Roswell crash in July of 1947 quite timely, and it certainly propelled the interest in space to mania levels. And Hollywood didn't miss the cue, since they were also owned by the Rothschilds. Hollywood started cranking out sci-fi movies by the truckload. And of course, in the mid-70s, things really hit a fervor with Star Wars, right? And that became the final, the new frontier. Back in the 50s and the 60s and into the 70s, the Western movies were tops at the box office, right? Those frontiers became the new frontier, which was outer space. And corporations saw an opportunity to make a ton of money by pushing the space meme. At some point, a scheme was hatched to fake these launch satellites into space for profit. NASA also became a tool to constantly remind humans of our insignificance in the boundless cosmic order. And NASA has been beating the divinity out of us with pseudoscience, propaganda, and spiritual delineation. In other words, control. Pre-NASA had accumulated and assimilated the intellectual property from Jack Parsons to the point where he was no longer needed or even wanted. And of course, some people think he was killed in that explosion, that it wasn't really an accident. Sputnik 1 was launched in 1957, fooling the world, and Explorer 1 soon followed in 1958, the year that NASA was created. And NASA was also created to militarize space and the atmosphere below it. But why? Simple. In order to conceal the deceptions of the Zionist corporate mafia and their Freemason minions, the corporations needed to secure the perimeter and operate above any jurisdiction. All information above our heads skyward was now in the hands of NASA as the official source. In other words, the propaganda machine was created. And it's laughable when you realize we're solely reliant on just one source for all information regarding the cosmos, right? NASA. Along with the controlled major mass media. NASA is free to dispense their CGI, their Photoshop, their fairy tales as fast as we can gobble them up. And you can bet that the Freemasons of NASA have been laughing along about their ruses. However, they are being exposed more than ever as their pseudoscience is crumbling before their very eyes. And you can just look at the numbers of podcasts like these. The numbers are going through the roof because people are understanding, the level of these lies that are being given to us on a daily basis. Now, going back, seemingly unrelated, right? In 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was signed and is now totally off limits, and it's backed by military force. And to a certain extent, the North Pole is also militarized, though no formal multilateral agreement exists like the one down in Antarctica. Still, any attempt to traverse either would probably result in immediate military expulsion and even possibly jail time. To date, no human has ever traversed Antarctica. Think about that for a moment and consider the absurdity of it. There's still a continent that has never been fully explored, and we're not allowed to access it. Why? Well, we know why. Even the treaty wiki page uses a satellite composite image of Antarctica. Where's the real photo? Hold on now. NASA can somehow send a satellite to Ceres 257, to Ceres, which is 257 million miles away without a hitch. But the deepest hole ever drilled on Earth is only 7.5 miles out of the 4,000 miles to the center of the Earth, as they claim. The other 3,952.5 miles is unknown, and pseudoscience, of course, fills in the blanks with no true hypothesis, just blather. Man hasn't even been to the bottom of his own ocean. So if we haven't mastered our own domain, how is it possible to send a probe to Ceres? And I think that's how it's CERES, and retrieve such stunning images. Because it's simulated, because it's CGI, and the only real images of Ceres that exist reside where they were created. And that is on the hard drives of NASA computers. Okay? We'll return to the aspect of Antarctica a little later. But, you know, the corporate mafia saw another opportunity to steal billions along with their fiat currency and their debt-based slavery. That opportunity was satellites launched into orbit. They had their Freemason Arthur C. Clarke riding shotgun, writing science fiction genre as if it were actually science. He was a key piece in creating the exploding interest in space and the great mysteries of the cosmos. Clarke was the perfect asset that NASA needed. Clarke's science fiction prowess elevated his fictional ideas as seemingly plausible and scientific. Behind the veil of a NASA was a symbolic baton that was passed to Clarke, who becomes the key to both the Apollo fraud and the ongoing satellite fraud. And how convenient it was that Clarke's 2001 A Space Oddity, I'm thinking of David Bowie, let's try that again. Clarke's 2001 A Space Odyssey was made into a movie by Stanley Kubrick in 1968. And the Apollo 11, there's your number again, 11 moon landings were faked by Kubrick in 1969. One could surmise that 2001 A Space Odyssey was a dry run prior to the Apollo. 2001 A Space Odyssey was the primer for the Apollo hoax. And since we know from part one that the International Space Station is fake, then you can posit that all satellites are illusory and don't exist. Now, do they exist on balloons? Sure. The only thing that exists are the profit margins and the corporate mafia. The satellites are pseudoscience, and there is no credible evidence that they exist. No actual photos, no actual video footage, only CGI, Pixar, Photoshop satellites. The staunch evidence that satellites do not exist is paradoxically simple because there's no credible proof that they exist. Now, people will remark, yeah, but I saw the International Space Station. Well, consider this for a moment, that what you may have saw was a replica. Remember, in World War II, and they still do it to this day, by the way, the infamous picture of the was that a C-130 when we were leaving Afghanistan the way we did, and the people running alongside of it. A lot of people said that was a balloon as well. But in World War II, the U.S. made wide use of inflatable tanks and rubber airplanes to deceive Hitler's reconnaissance efforts. From high altitude, you cannot make the distinction between real or rubber. The point is, the military has a history of this type of deception. And again, NASA is part of the military-industrial complex. Bill Cooper, someone, who I have been following for a long, long time, he said the exploration of the moon stopped because it was impossible to continue the hoax without being discovered. And of course, they ran out of pre-filmed episodes. No man has ever ascended much higher than 300 miles, if that high, above the Earth's surface. At or under that altitude, some people will tell you the astronauts are beneath the radiation of the Van Allen belt, but we know that the Van Allen belt is the firmament. It is the real reason why they can't go anywhere. No man has ever orbited, landed on, or walked upon the moon, period. How many manned missions to a planetary body could they fake? just enough to set the table for the real goal, and that's thousands of fake satellites launched into space and big profit margins. This was much safer and secure revenue stream for the corporations, and having never returned to the moon to make the case. And if you look at the companies involved in the satellite sector, you'll want to look up 4 Rothschild companies that are the majority shareholders: Vanguard, State Street, Fidelity, and BlackRock. Okay, they're all involved. They're the folks that are involved in the military industrial complex, the medical industrial complex, and the media industrial complex. It's the same 4 companies. They are all connected. Okay? So there you go. I think that's probably a pretty good place to start. By the way, don't forget, the same institutional majority shareholders of major Hollywood companies and subsidiaries such as Disney, Comcast, MGM, DreamWorks are all they're all owned by those same 4 companies. So the same people who control NASA and satellites control Hollywood and Pixar. So these are the same companies who can promote the fakery, right? The Pixars and the MGMs and the DreamWorks. These are the companies that can create the fakery with the paint shop. So there you go. We all know that the global communications are used. 99.5% of the world is grounded together. And we'll get back to that on another time. We'll talk about the ionosphere, sky waves, and how the communications and the capabilities of transmissions actually work, right? By the way, don't forget the Freemasonic use of the word ISS and ISIS. Companies like the Near Space Corporation have other technologies such as the high-altitude shuttle systems, the small balloon systems, and the nano balloon systems. And these can reach altitudes of 100,000 feet, and they can carry these shuttles as a payload. So if there's not enough to cast doubt on the existence of satellite, check out Project Loon by Google, and their motto is balloon-powered internet for everyone. Project Loon balloons float in the stratosphere, twice the size as airplanes in the weather. So in the stratosphere, there are many layers of wind, and each layer of wind varies in direction and speed. So these Loon balloons go where they're needed by rising or descending into a layer of wind, blowing into the desired travel. Okay, and partnering with these telecommunication companies to share the cellular spectrum, you'll see that they've enabled people to connect to the balloon network directly from their phones. So we'll get more into this in a future episode. We'll talk more about how these things really work, the high-altitude airships, Japanese HAPS, the heliplats, sky towers, the airborne relay communications, StratSats, et cetera, et cetera. But we're already at 1:15, and I have to move on with my day. Thank you for your continued support. Questions, comments, and concerns about this podcast, you can send them to the flatearthfiles@gmail.com, and check out our website, theflatearthfiles.com, and make sure you check out the show description, and make sure, be open-minded. A lot of these things we talk about may seem very absurd to you, but when you realize how many layers there are to this onion, we should never really issue anything anymore, because the depths of the lies are just unimaginable. That's it for me, guys. Have to move on with my day. I hope you have a great week, and God bless each and every one of you. Keep your head on a swivel. It's going to be an interesting week. They're going to throw more divide and conquer at us. So there you go. Take care, everyone.
You're listening to the Fact Hunter Radio Network.
Just the facts, ma'am.
Hey, hon, we really need new phones.
T-Mobile will cover the cost of 4 amazing new iPhone 15s, and each line is only $25 a month.
New iPhone 15s? Best new year ever.
Get 4 iPhone 15s on us with eligible trade-in when you switch to T-Mobile.
Minimum of 4 lines for $25 per line per month with autopay discount using debit or bank account. $5 more per line without autopay, plus taxes and fees. Phone fee at 24 monthly bill credits for well-qualified customers. Contact us before canceling account to continue bill credits or credit stop and balance on required finance agreement due. $35 per line connection charge applies. See T-Mobile.com.
T-Mobile has invested billions to light up America's largest 5G network, from big cities to small towns, including right here in yours. And great coverage is just the beginning. Right now, families and small businesses can save up to 20% versus AT&T and Verizon when they switch. Visit your local T-Mobile store today.
Plan savings with 2 to 3 lines of T-Mobile Essentials versus comparable available plans. Plan features and taxes and fees may vary.